Hello, and welcome to Mind Sherlock, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Today, I bring you a brand new Sherlock Holmes mystery, filled with twists, clues, and clever deductions. Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel the case together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Now, let's get started. Throughout my long acquaintance with Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I had seldom witnessed him so ill at ease as he was that bleak November evening at Baker Street. He paced from window to fireplace in a manner reminiscent of a caged predator, his lean figure tense and his gaze distant. Typically, Holmes relished an enigma that tested his formidable intellect. Yet on that night, his restless movements bespoke an agitation that stirred my concern. For some time, I observed him from the comfort of my armchair, watching as he occasionally paused to examine a scrap of unread correspondence or cast a fleeting glance at his violin. Neither clue nor music appeared to soothe him. He seemed, in a word, haunted, though by what I could not divine. Outside, the dull glow of the street lamps struggled against the thickening fog, and the hush of the hour only heightened the sense of foreboding within our rooms. At length, unable to restrain my curiosity, I ventured to address my friend. "You appear uncommonly troubled, Holmes. Does something weigh on your mind?" For a moment, he offered no reply, his gaze fixed on some unseen point beyond the parlour walls. Then, with a slight shake of his head, he forced a thin, unconvincing smile. "My dear Watson," said he, "I fear that a matter of some gravity may soon present itself upon our threshold. I cannot say more without confirmation. Let us merely hope I am mistaken." This cryptic hint did little to allay my anxiety, yet I knew better than to press him. Whatever the nature of his premonition, I sensed it would not be long before the threshold of 221B was crossed by one bearing tidings of trouble. Holmes lapsed again into silence, leaving me with the uneasy conviction our peace would soon shatter. Scarcely had my thoughts begun to wander from Holmes's unsettling remark when a sudden, urgent knock sounded at our door. Holmes snapped to attention at once, a spark of keen anticipation in his gaze. Mrs. Hudson's familiar tread echoed in the corridor, followed swiftly by the hesitant shuffle of an unknown visitor. The stranger who stepped into our sitting room introduced himself as Sir Edgar Charlton, a man of considerable bearing, yet visibly undone by some dire predicament. His complexion was pallid, and perspiration glistened upon his brow. He fumbled with his hat, scarcely aware of where he placed it, and when he spoke, his voice trembled with an apprehension that betrayed his outward composure. "Mr. Holmes," he murmured, I must beg your pardon for the lateness of this call, but I have no other recourse." Holmes, who moments before had appeared so restless, now assumed an air of calm detachment, his grey eyes fixed on our visitor with searching intensity. "Pray, be seated, Sir Edgar," said he. "You seem in desperate need of assistance." With shaking hands, Sir Edgar sank into the chair opposite Holmes. "Forgive me," he began. "I would never have presumed upon you at this hour, but circumstances have become intolerably grave. There is a matter, indeed a peril, that could not wait until morning." His agitation was palpable, and I, for my part, felt my concern mount. If the situation were urgent enough to rouse such dread in a man of his station, it must be of no trifling nature. Holmes nodded for him to continue, and Sir Edgar took a moment to compose himself. "I have come," he said at last, "to place before you a problem so extraordinary that I scarcely believe it myself." His gaze flickered about the room, as though expecting some unseen assailant. "A dreadful document has reached my hands," he continued in a tone barely above a whisper. "It concerns a matter of vital secrecy, one which threatens my reputation. I come to you, Mr. Holmes, for I know no other who might untangle this peril. Time, I fear, grows short." Holmes leaned forward, his expression turning more serious by the moment, Sir Edgar, he said softly, pray, enlighten us about the nature of this document. If it indeed threatens your reputation and perhaps more, we must grasp every detail. The man inhaled shakily, and for an instant I feared he might lose his composure altogether. The document, he began, is no ordinary file. It relates to an investigation you conducted years ago, Mr. Holmes, one never made public. Indeed, I believe even Dr. Watson here may be unaware of it. My sources suggest it was so perilous that you vowed never to speak of it. I turned to Holmes in alarm, for I had never known him to withhold the details of a case once the danger had passed. Yet, at Sir Edgar's words, Holmes's lips tightened, and his eyes flickered with what I can only describe as painful recognition. Indeed, said he, his tone cool, though I perceived a troubled undercurrent. Pray continue. Sir Edgar swallowed hard. A certain faction operating in the shadows has acquired this file. Their intentions are unclear, but rumours indicate they aim to leverage your involvement in that old affair. If you do not comply with their demands, whatever those may be, they will expose certain secrets that could place your life in immediate peril. At this, I noted Holmes's knuckles turn white as he gripped the arm of his chair. Such attempts at coercion are not uncommon, he murmured. Yet for them to invoke a matter so deeply buried is unusual. Unusual, repeated Sir Edgar. It is disastrous. I have reason to believe these criminals are connected to powerful figures who blame you for past humiliations. If they reveal the truth behind your earlier investigation, they may well succeed in turning even your allies against you. Holmes stood, hands clasped behind his back. Then, my friend, he said quietly, we must learn precisely who they are and what they hope to gain. The hour is late, but we shall not rest until we have cast light upon this darkness. At that, the die was cast. Whatever threat lurked in the shadows, I knew Sherlock Holmes would face it with all the unyielding resolve he possessed, and I, for my part, would stand beside him. Little did I suspect how deeply that darkness truly ran, nor how grievously it would test Holmes's resolve in the days ahead. Before Sir Edgar had fully recovered his composure, he all but forced a small envelope into Holmes's hand. Inside was a single slip of paper bearing a series of cryptic numbers. This note arrived at my office this morning, said Sir Edgar, the tremor in his voice still palpable. I scarcely comprehend its meaning, but an associate of mine in the Foreign Office claims it enumerates a price placed upon your head, Mr. Holmes. He paused, swallowing with difficulty. Your past successes, it seems, have earned you enemies of formidable power, men who would see you silenced at any cost. Holmes studied the figures with a cool, almost detached curiosity. Indeed, he murmured, the sum is not insignificant. It appears our adversaries hold me in high regard, though the compliment is a singularly lethal one. He folded the note and slipped it into his pocket, turning sharply to the troubled Sir Edgar. I trust this is but one piece of the puzzle you brought tonight, and I thank you for your candour. Rest assured I shall treat your confidence with the utmost discretion. Alarmed by the danger now revealed, I could not restrain a trembling question. Holmes, do you truly believe these men will stop at nothing? He responded with an uncharacteristic hesitation. They have already ventured far enough to threaten a reputable gentleman such as Sir Edgar, and they have dredged up a matter I had hoped long buried. Yes, Watson, I suspect they shall not rest until I am discredited or destroyed. A heavy silence settled upon the room, broken only by Sir Edgar's uneven breathing. In that moment, I realized we had crossed a threshold. The threat was no longer some abstract menace. It was a direct and terrible assault upon the life of my friend, Sherlock Holmes himself. Though I had witnessed my friend confront dangers with the steadiest of nerves, I perceived a subtle shift in his demeanour that night. His expression remained composed, yet I sensed an unspoken burden pressing upon him more heavily than ever before. Ordinarily, he would respond to threats on his life with a half smile and a crisp remark about the game being afoot. Now a certain silence hung in the air, whenever Sir Edgar's ominous words were revisited. It was as though Holmes grappled with the significance of a foe both anonymous and intimately acquainted with his history, the memory of past leniency nagging at his conscience. He kept his eyes lowered for a moment longer than usual, then straightened as though bracing himself for what lay ahead. Unnerved by this rare vulnerability in my companion, I resolved to remain ever vigilant, standing by him through trials we would soon face. With Sir Edgar's troubling plea still fresh in our minds, it was little surprise that Holmes's first action upon the morning was to insist upon seeing the very document that had prompted our visitor's desperate entreaty. The instant Sir Edgar returned with the slender, sealed packet, Holmes seized it, unfastened its ribbon, and spread the pages across our table with the fervour of a man determined to unearth every hidden meaning. "My dear Watson," he muttered at length, his voice laced with the keen excitement that so often accompanied a new puzzle. "It appears we are dealing with a matter that straddles both political and private spheres. Note the references here to certain governmental codes, and yet the language is riddled with personal undertones, as though the composer possessed a singular vendetta." Frowning, I rose to peer over his shoulder, taking in the faint markings and arcane notations. "Yet none of it is entirely transparent," I ventured. "One might suspect blackmail, or perhaps espionage, but the specifics are unclear." Holmes tapped a slender finger against an enigmatic emblem in the margin. "This symbol, Watson, I have encountered before. In an investigation from my early years, one so hazardous I feared it best kept from public knowledge. At the time, I believed that business concluded. Now it seems I was mistaken." At those words, he paused, his brow furrowed in a manner I had seldom witnessed. A fleeting expression of uncertainty crossed his features, as though he weighed the wisdom of resuming a deadly dance with ghosts from his past. Then, with a resolute breath, he continued reading. "Sir Edgar, you believe these lines represent a concerted threat, perhaps aimed at high officials, or even myself, do you not?" he inquired, looking up. The pallid official nodded gravely, confirming what I already suspected. Holmes resumed, his tone grim. "If these markings are genuine, we face the resurgence of a foe I once believed permanently defeated. Their survival, and the cunning nature of this coded text, indicates that not only has our adversary returned, but he has deliberately contrived to lure me back into his web. The consequences could be dire indeed." Though I scarcely knew the full cause of Holmes's sudden disquiet, I sensed his concern was well-founded. Thus began our inquiry into a document whose mere existence threatened to draw us both into a labyrinth of past transgressions and imminent peril. I felt foreboding. No sooner had Holmes closed his examination of the perilous document than I observed a rare somberness seize his countenance. Customarily, he would immerse himself in the puzzle's complexities without so much as a flicker of hesitation. Yet on this occasion, a heavy burden seemed to weigh upon him, manifest in the slow, deliberate manner with which he folded the pages and set them aside. "Watson," he said at last, his voice almost subdued, "do you recall any instance in all our adventures when I fully refused to disclose the details of a case? Though I have often insisted upon secrecy until the resolution was in hand, I believe only once have I sealed my records with the solemn intention of never revealing them. I tried to recollect each of our prior exploits, but none matched the gravity of what he now implied. In answer, Holmes drew out a small, locked ledger from the far corner of his bookshelf, its leather binding worn and the clasp tarnished by time. He ran a finger over it, meeting my gaze with visible reluctance. "This volume," he explained, "contains notes pertaining to an investigation so fraught with danger that I deemed it best kept from even my most trusted allies. That I revisit it now chills me to the core, for the events described therein ended under deeply troubling circumstances. Indeed, it was a case I declared my single greatest mistake." When he finally unlocked the ledger, I saw within it only a few cryptic symbols, initials, and half-scribbled references. "My dear fellow," I ventured, "why did you not confide in me then?" Holmes gave a wistful smile that did not reach his eyes. "Because, Watson, I hoped never to face its repercussions again. Yet, should our present ordeal confirm my suspicions, I fear the mistakes of my youth have returned to collect a formidable debt." The quiet conviction in his tone left me deeply unsettled, for I had never before witnessed Sherlock Holmes regard his own past with such haunting dread. His measured breath suggested a memory best left buried in oblivion. The following morning found us bound for Whitehall, where Sir Edgar Charlton awaited our arrival with palpable anxiety. Holmes had instructed him to preserve the scene of the burglary in its untouched state, fearing that any interference might obscure vital clues. Thus, when we reached Sir Edgar's private office, I was unsurprised to discover overturned ledgers, scattered papers. "Observe, Watson," Holmes remarked as he knelt to inspect a faint trail of scuff marks near the windowsill. Our visitor was exceedingly nimble, judging by the depth and angle of these imprints. Indeed, I should surmise he gained entry with remarkable agility, perhaps even employing a grappling hook. Sir Edgar, still trembling from the intrusion, wrung his hands. "They stole nothing, Mr. Holmes, not a single sheet or instrument. Instead, they left those odd symbols scrawled upon the wall. Why would a thief break in merely to deliver a message?" Holmes rose and moved closer to the cryptic markings. "This was no random burglary, Sir Edgar. Our adversary intends us to follow a trail, albeit a perilous one. The inscription, though obscure, bears a resemblance to the code we observed in your document. It is an invitation, if you will, for me to involve myself more deeply." With deft precision, he produced a small notebook and copied each line of the chalk writing. The tension in the air seemed almost tangible, as though we stood upon the threshold of a snare set by an unseen hunter. "I can confirm," Holmes continued gravely, "that the symbolism aligns with the operation I once considered closed. We must, therefore, proceed with the utmost caution. Any misstep here could prove fatal." A hush fell upon the room, broken only by Sir Edgar's uneasy breathing. Determined not to let dread deter us, Holmes returned his gaze to the puzzling signs. "Come, Watson," he said at last. "We have gleaned what we can from this place. Let us retire to Baker Street, where I shall attempt to decode these further hints. It appears the game has been set in motion, and I will not shrink from the challenge." Holmes lingered within Sir Edgar's office, determined to glean every morsel of intelligence hidden amid the chaos. Though we had already noted the burglary's curious lack of theft, my friend seemed convinced that deeper secrets lay scattered about. With a keen glance, he bent once more near the windowsill, examining the faint scuff marks we had glimpsed earlier. "Observe the width and spacing, Watson," he said, tracing the indentations with a careful fingertip. "Whoever climbed in and out possessed uncommon agility and precision. A mere prowler might leave broader signs of forced entry, but these marks suggest a practiced hand, possibly one accustomed to navigating treacherous heights." Sir Edgar hovered anxiously at Holmes's shoulder. "Then this intruder was no common thief?" he ventured. Holmes stood, his gaze intent. "Precisely. Our culprit may be someone engaged in far more deliberate activities, seeking not money but influence or leverage." Wandering to a corner of the room, Holmes paused, nostrils flaring. "Curious," he muttered. "Do you detect a faint aroma lingering here, Watson?" I followed his lead and caught the lingering trace of an unfamiliar smoke. "It is reminiscent of a spiced tobacco," I replied, uncertain. "Yet I confess it eludes my knowledge." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "This particular blend is exceedingly rare, favoured by an old adversary of mine, one we believed vanished some years ago. The presence of such tobacco is no coincidence. It suggests that our thief, if not the same individual, is at least in league with him." The mention of a long-lost foe prompted a question I dared not ask. Holmes had spoken in the past of certain enemies whose cunning rivaled his own, yet none so thoroughly consumed his thoughts as one whose name he refused to utter without compelling cause. Feeling the tension mount, I hesitated before speaking. Holmes, you do not suggest that the man behind this is… He raised a hand to forestall my conclusion. Let us not jump to dire certainties, Watson. However, the tobacco's presence implies that we are dealing with a party intent on resurrecting what I once believed concluded. If this indeed heralds the return of that particular adversary, we must brace ourselves for a struggle unlike any we have known. Sir Edgar, visibly shaken, cast a worried glance at the scattered papers upon his desk. Holmes, with renewed resolve, slipped a scrap of scribbled cipher into his pocket. Let us gather every clue, he said quietly. We must leave no corner unexamined if we are to unmask our foe. Having collected the scraps of coded text and the unsettling clues left behind, Holmes led us from Sir Edgar's office to a dimly lit antechamber where he could study the symbols without interruption. With methodical care, he spread the fragments out upon a narrow table, running his fingertip over each line of enigmatic script. This arrangement of numbers and letters, he remarked, bears a striking resemblance to a cipher I once decoded during an affair that took place near the Adriatic coast. My recollection is that the cracked code led to the capture of an assassin with ties to multiple European courts. I could not conceal my surprise. You mean the same assassin who claimed to have conspired with factions intent on toppling entire governments? Holmes offered a curt nod. Precisely. Through a combination of cryptanalysis and leverage upon certain informants, I succeeded in intercepting his plan. He was subsequently imprisoned. If this cipher shares roots with that earlier plot, then someone closely connected to that unfortunate soul is at work. That may explain the tobacco's presence and the cunning infiltration here. Glancing at Sir Edgar, who lingered just beyond earshot, I lowered my voice. But Holmes, might it not be a mere coincidence? After all, ciphers can sometimes overlap, and criminals do adopt methods they learn from the underworld at large. Holmes's grey eyes flickered with conviction. Coincidences of this magnitude are exceedingly rare. The cunning structure of these symbols, paired with the recollection of an old adversary, suggests we are witnessing the deliberate handiwork of an entity fully versed in my methods. He held my gaze with solemn intensity. We must proceed carefully, Watson. This is no idle threat. If the code indeed belongs to those connected with that sinister alliance, our every move will be monitored. A sudden tremor of apprehension passed through me. The past had begun to cast a long shadow upon the present, beckoning Holmes deeper into a labyrinth of dangers. Though he showed no fear, I could see the gravity of this new challenge pressing upon his mind. The cipher had called, and Holmes was prepared to answer. As we pored over the puzzling script, Sir Edgar offered a tentative suggestion. Could foreign agents be behind this intrusion, Mr. Holmes? Might this be some act of espionage against Her Majesty's government? Holmes, however, shook his head with measured certainty. I do not deny that espionage is rampant across Europe, but these symbols and methods point elsewhere. A conventional spy ring would likely aim to steal, not to leave messages in chalk, nor to single out an investigator they once contended with. No, this is personal, not merely political. I ventured to press him further. And yet, Holmes, might an international conspiracy not wish to torment you specifically? After all, you have thwarted more than a few unscrupulous designs in recent years. Holmes's lips formed a faint, ironic smile. Indeed, Watson, I have garnered a degree of attention. But the cunning behind this scheme bears a particular imprint, one I recognize from the depths of an older, darker affair. If we assume it is but foreign espionage, we risk failing to grasp the true nature of our adversary. Sir Edgar appeared perplexed, but Holmes would entertain no further speculation. He returned to the cipher with renewed resolve, indicating that he had already dismissed the notion of a mere spy ring. My curiosity, meanwhile, grew ever sharper. What hidden spectre from Holmes's past could provoke such a resolute stance against the plausible theory of espionage? Late that evening, upon returning to Baker Street, Holmes retreated to his private quarters. I heard him rummaging through a locked drawer, emerging moments later with a sealed envelope bearing an inscription that made my blood run cold. For Dr. John Watson, to be opened if I fall. He handed it to me without a word, his features grave. "Watson," he said quietly, "this case looms darker than I anticipated. Should the worst befall me, you must know the true extent of the conspiracy we face." My protest was immediate. "Holmes, you cannot possibly believe." He raised a hand to silence me. "I harbor no desire to alarm you, but old enemies wield long memories. Keep this envelope safe. Read it only if events should take an unthinkable turn." Though the packet felt ominously light in my grasp, its weight upon my conscience grew heavy indeed. In that moment, I realized how deeply Holmes felt the gravity of his opponent's return. Should his single misstep expose him to lethal peril, the words within that envelope might be all that remained to unveil the truth in his stead. In pursuit of the truth behind the cryptic document, Holmes and I descended into the labyrinth of London's criminal underworld. With each step, the smoky gloom of dimly lit taverns and shadowy alleys seemed to mirror the uncertainty of our case. Yet Holmes pressed forward with unwavering determination, guided by the intuition that the city's most elusive denizens might harbor fragments of the puzzle we sought to solve. Our first stop was a notorious establishment on the fringes of Whitechapel, its clientele comprising gamblers, ruffians, and unfortunates. Holmes approached the bartender with quiet authority, posing discreet questions about coded communications or illicit dealings rumored to involve foreign conspirators. Though most patrons feigned ignorance, whispers soon arose concerning a masked figure seen exchanging cryptic parchments in a private back room. By the time we gained entry, however, the stranger had vanished, leaving behind a worn playing card bearing the same emblem as Sir Edgar's stolen papers. From there, we ventured deeper into the city's dark heart, arriving at a discreet opium house by the docks. Amid the hazy gloom, Holmes conferred with an old informant, a gaunt fellow known as Gus. Despite his half-addled state, Gus recounted sightings of a furtive broker in contraband knowledge who specialized in coded documents. Holmes pressed him for names, but Gus could only mumble about a lady versed in secret ciphers, a woman he believed possessed the key to countless mysteries. Each new stop yielded only fragments of truth, entangling us further in the labyrinth of London's clandestine networks. As midnight approached, I became convinced that unseen eyes marked our every move. Holmes, though alert to danger, proceeded with a calm assurance, occasionally pausing at a corner as though half expecting an apparition from his past. When at last we retired, the odor of stale spirits clung to us, and my mind teemed with hushed voices and half-glimpsed figures. Yet Holmes's expression was resolute. In the cryptic hints gleaned from the underworld, he had discerned the faint outline of a trail that would, in time, lead us to the very threshold of peril. Before parting ways with Gus, Holmes posed one final query regarding the name Marchford, and the informant's wary response suggested that our next lead lay in a realm far grander than Whitechapel. Intent upon unearthing the significance of that whispered name, Holmes and I set about contacting those in reputable society who might shed light on Lady Helena Marchford's affairs. The Baroness Sutcliffe, an acquaintance of mine through charitable circles, hinted that Lady Helena was known for her remarkable intellect and flair for cryptological puzzles. Despite her aristocratic background, she had apparently withdrawn from public view following a scandalous incident some years prior. Thus armed with a formal introduction from the Baroness, we called upon Lady Helena at her townhouse in Mayfair. To my surprise, she received us without hesitation, her demeanour poised and unruffled. She was a woman of dignified carriage, bearing a pair of sharp, watchful eyes that, in certain moments, seemed to appraise Holmes, as though she already knew more than she cared to admit. After polite pleasantries, Holmes ventured to inquire about her expertise in deciphering obscure symbols. A wry smile touched her lips. "Mr. Holmes, I have long admired your feats of detection," she remarked. "Yet I suspect you are here due to a puzzle involving matters far removed from harmless parlour diversions." She hinted that she had knowledge of a lost royal cipher, a code said to contain hidden genealogical data of some vital significance. When Holmes pressed for details, however, Lady Helena offered little. "Suffice it to say," she purred, "that certain secrets, if unearthed, could change the fortunes of families." There was, I sensed, a veiled caution in her words, an intimation that any prying might invite peril. Holmes regarded her with a quiet intensity that belied his outward calm. "Might this cipher relate to certain recent thefts?" he asked, subtly referencing Sir Edgar's predicament. Lady Helena neither confirmed nor denied, instead suggesting that if Holmes proved worthy, he might discover the truth himself. Upon our departure, Holmes maintained a thoughtful silence, broken only once we reached the street. "Mark my words, Watson," he murmured. "Lady Helena Marchford is no idle bystander. She possesses knowledge of the code, if not the key itself. Whether she acts as ally or adversary remains to be seen, yet her name is intricately bound to this affair." In that single declaration, I perceived the first clear sign that we had stumbled upon a central figure in our unfolding mystery. As we reflected upon our interview with Lady Helena, a sudden summons arrived in the form of a terse note delivered by a uniformed constable. Inspector Lestrade requested our immediate presence at Scotland Yard. Sensing urgency in every stroke of his message, Holmes and I lost no time in complying. Upon arrival, Lestrade greeted us with an expression that blended duty and genuine concern. "Mr. Holmes," he began, "I have received intelligence from Interpol indicating that your name has surfaced on several watch lists. Lists that bear a more ominous title in certain circles: Watch and Eliminate. Evidently, you are not merely an irritant, but a priority target for interests abroad. Have you any notion why this threat has escalated so swiftly?" Holmes exchanged a quick glance with me before replying. "There are numerous parties who resent my interventions, Inspector. Yet this united threat suggests old adversaries pooling their resources." Lestrade nodded grimly, consulting a ledger on his desk. "The intelligence further indicates that these groups may connect to powerful individuals across Europe. They seem determined to silence you, permanently, if need be." At that, Holmes folded his arms, his features set in quiet resolve. "Thank you for the warning, Inspector. I appreciate your candor. This development only reaffirms my decision to continue, for somewhere in this storm of intrigue lies the source of these conspiracies." Lestrade could merely wish us success as we stepped away. Outside, the fading daylight cast long shadows across the yard, and I noted a flicker of concern in Holmes's eyes. That he bore the brunt of such concentrated malevolence weighed upon him. Yet if he felt any fear, he betrayed it only in the tightening of his jaw and the firm conviction that he must press on until every hidden enemy was brought to light. In pursuit of fresh intelligence regarding the coded threats, Holmes and I set forth for Limehouse, a quarter of the city seldom spoken of in polite society. There, in a squalid courtyard off a narrow lane, we encountered a ragged fellow known only as the blind beggar. Although his sight was long lost to some unknown misfortune, his knowledge of the district's hidden dealings seemed boundless. Holmes approached him with guarded respect, recalling the man's former identity as an informant of sorts during a clandestine operation many years before. The blind beggar, for his part, recognized Holmes at once by voice alone. "They say you are being hunted again," he rasped, tapping a gnarled cane against the cobblestones. "Dark forces do not easily forget the one who ruined their best-laid plans." Holmes listened intently, his posture betraying neither surprise nor alarm. "You speak of men and schemes left for dead in the annals of my past. Tell me, old friend, what have you heard?" At this, the blind beggar produced a small wooden token carved with a cryptic design, a sign, he claimed, that once symbolized an alliance between high-born schemers and ruthless mercenaries. "It reappears in the shadows of Limehouse, Mr. Holmes," he croaked, "and if it has found you, there will be blood to pay." Though the man could reveal no definitive names, he offered an obscure couplet, allegedly passed among local smugglers. When the mirror cracks, the lion roars. Bury the past behind locked doors. Holmes pocketed the token with grave deliberation, thanking the beggar for his cautionary tidings. As we took our leave, he confided to me that the cryptic verse echoed faintly of a debacle from his early career, one involving misplaced trust and a debt yet unpaid. Thus, armed with the beggar's warning, we departed Limehouse. My companion's expression, however, remained sober, for he sensed that any misstep in this tangled web might unleash consequences reaching far beyond London's darkest alleys, perhaps even into the corridors of power. Even as we departed, the blind beggar's words rang in my ears, a haunting reminder of perils to come. Doubtless the blind beggar's cryptic verse weighed upon Holmes's mind as we returned to Baker Street that night. Yet scarcely had we settled within our sitting room when a courier arrived with a sealed dispatch adorned by an ornate seal I recognized as belonging to a certain palace official. Within lay references to genealogical documents rumored to be locked away in a royal archive, hinting that the code we pursued might involve ancestral claims of grave consequence. At first glance, I could not help wondering if these fresh details aligned with Lady Helena's earlier insinuations. She had spoken of a lost royal cipher, and now we beheld the very suggestion that this intricate puzzle might conceal a scandal capable of shaking monarchical foundations. However, Holmes perused the documents with a distinct air of skepticism. "Consider the phraseology here, Watson," he remarked, tapping a neatly written paragraph. "It proposes a connection to an ancient line of succession, yet curiously fails to provide any actual proof. One might well suspect a deliberate diversion aimed at luring us into public controversy. Such tactics are consistent with certain cunning adversaries of mine, who thrive upon distracting investigators." Despite the formidable allure of a royal scandal, Holmes maintained that the clues pointed to a more personal motive. Recall the blind beggar's mention of old alliances formed between aristocracy and criminal elements. If indeed a secret of the crown were at stake, I would anticipate more discreet maneuverings, not these blatant attempts to sow confusion. I endeavored to press the royal angle, mindful that such revelations had the power to topple influential houses. Holmes, however, stood firm. Though potent, the spectre of royal intrigue may be a mask for a deeper betrayal, one rooted in my greatest misstep. The beggar's token, the cryptic verse, even Lady Helena's wary glances, all suggest a vendetta tied to our foe's sense of wounded pride. As the night wore on, I sensed Holmes wrestling with the notion that his earlier clemency toward a dangerous opponent had borne bitter fruit. His unspoken regret manifested in his meticulous re-examination of every page, every symbol. By dawn, it seemed plain that while a royal secret might be the surface layer of this puzzle, Holmes believed it merely the instrument of a far more personal vengeance. Indeed, the promise of regal intrigue paled before Holmes's haunting conviction that past sins now rose to claim him. In the early hours of that same morning, Holmes insisted we venture outdoors for fresh air and quiet deliberation. The streets were eerily still, lamplight flickering in the hazy pre-dawn gloom. My friend walked ahead at a measured pace, his gaze turned inward, as though contemplating each clue amassed thus far. Despite the calm exterior, I sensed an electric tension beneath his composure. Without warning, a sharp crack tore through the silence, followed by the hiss of a projectile passing mere inches from Holmes's shoulder. Instinctively, I lunged forward, my heart pounding as I realized we had come under rifle fire, or perhaps the bullet from a concealed pistol. Holmes dropped low, scanning the dark windows overhead. But we spotted no immediate movement, only the echo of hurried steps fading into the distance. He retrieved the spent bullet where it had ricocheted against a lamppost. To our collective horror, the metal bore an engraving identical to the emblem scrawled at Sir Edgar's office. "We have our answer, Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice revealing the slightest tremor. "Our enemies have grown impatient enough to strike openly. This attack confirms that we stand far too close to the hidden truth." I glanced about, half expecting a second shot, yet none came. Though Holmes attempted to give chase, we found only empty alleys and locked doors. The assassin, whoever he was, had vanished. Nevertheless, this brazen attempt on Holmes's life spoke volumes. Whoever orchestrated the coded threats possessed resources and nerve to stage an ambush upon a deserted London street at dawn. In his usual analytical manner, Holmes studied the bullet's carving, remarking upon its precision and the faint smell of gunpowder that still clung to it. "Whoever fired this shot is no novice to the craft, Watson. Their message is plain. Cease our inquiries or pay the ultimate price." I could only stand in grim agreement. Though shaken by the near miss, Holmes was undeterred. With the bullet as fresh evidence of our adversary's ruthlessness, he resolved that we must press forward with even greater resolve. The darkness circling us now had grown dangerously tangible, and our every step might lead us closer to a cunning, lethal foe. Determined not to yield to intimidation, Holmes motioned for me to follow him home at once, vowing that no assassin's bullet would deter him from unmasking the architect of this malignant scheme, whatever the personal cost or danger. The morning after the assassin's bullet narrowly missed Holmes, I found myself studying my friend with mounting unease. He had slept but a few hours, emerging with the same restless energy that had gripped him the previous evening. Though outwardly calm, he carried an air of brooding intensity that weighed upon my mind. His every movement seemed marked by a hidden resolve, as though the attempt on his life had hardened his determination rather than diminishing it. I could not help recalling the sealed envelope Holmes had once pressed into my hands. A contingency if he should fall. Now, witnessing the grave tension etched upon his face, I feared that envelope might soon become relevant. In all our adventures, I had rarely seen him so personally entangled in a case. It was not merely the assassin's shot that troubled me. It was the sense that Holmes was wrestling with a lingering guilt tied to the very heart of this mystery. Once, as he pored over scraps of cipher at our sitting-room table, I ventured a quiet remark. "Holmes, could it be that your zeal is clouding your judgment?" He glanced up sharply, and for a moment I spied a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. But no sooner had it appeared than it vanished behind the curtain of his disciplined mind. "You underestimate me, Watson," he replied, his tone mildly reproachful. "I assure you, my reason remains intact. If anything, I see matters more clearly now than ever before." Yet despite his assurances, an indescribable dread gnawed at me. I resolved to stand guard by his side, fully aware that his brilliance, if left unchecked, might lead him straight into the jaws of those who hunted him. Over the following days, Holmes flung himself into the investigation with a vigor that astonished even me. He dispatched messages to distant contacts, rifled through newspapers for obscure reports, and ventured into dingy corners of the metropolis in pursuit of vital scraps of intelligence. I accompanied him wherever I could, determined not to leave him unprotected. Yet with each fresh lead, I detected a subtle change in our circumstances. More than one furtive figure seemed to follow us, slinking out of sight the instant we turned. At first, Holmes downplayed these ominous signs. "A man in my position, Watson, ought never be surprised to find shadows in his wake," he said. However, the mounting evidence suggested that these watchers were no ordinary street rogues. More than once, I glimpsed the same embroidered emblem, identical to that inscribed on the bullet, upon a coat cuff or half hidden beneath a lapel. Whoever our enemies might be, they had broadened their operations and multiplied in number, tightening a net that now threatened to ensnare Holmes. Despite the obvious danger, Holmes continued his inquiries undeterred. Calling upon various informants, he gathered fragments of gossip pointing toward a hidden syndicate, one rumoured to have been crippled by him years ago and now seeking vengeance. A cryptic letter that arrived by post further underscored the peril, warning Holmes to abandon his search lest he suffer the fate intended for him in that deserted street. Though most would have faltered in the face of such a threat, Holmes pressed on, spurred by both principle and a certain fierce pride. Nevertheless, I could not shake the feeling that this unrelenting pursuit of truth had turned dreadfully personal. Even Holmes, ever the paragon of self-control, appeared to bear the weight of old regrets upon his shoulders. The shadows he battled were no longer confined to the London fog, but seemed to stretch inward, threatening to eclipse the very clarity of mind upon which his genius depended. Thus, as we neared the critical juncture of our investigation, I came to understand that solving this mystery would demand more than mere intellect. It would require the full measure of Sherlock Holmes's courage and resolve. That day found me in a state of mounting anticipation, for Mr. Sherlock Holmes had issued summons to all the principal figures embroiled in our complicated affair. The revelation that he had cracked the perplexing cipher seemed to offer both relief and dread in equal measure. Over the course of the afternoon, he penned a series of notes to each individual intimately connected with the case, instructing them to present themselves at 221B Baker Street by nightfall. Though Holmes did not confide in me his full plan, he made it plain that some grand conclusion was imminent. The identities of our anticipated guests were as varied as they were fraught with tension. Sir Edgar Charlton, pale but resolute, had signalled his intention to attend. Lady Helena Marchford's acceptance arrived in the form of a terse letter, revealing no hint of her disposition. Even Inspector Lestrade made known that he would call, albeit with some scepticism. Additionally, a certain unnamed informant from the underworld, rumoured to hold a vital link to the secret message, also announced he would appear at the appointed hour. Throughout the day, Holmes prowled our sitting room with purposeful energy, rearranging chairs and scanning various documents. He paused only to verify that the guests would come precisely at the hour he had decreed. I could not ignore the glint in his eye, that keen edge signifying that the final move in his intricate game was at hand. By dusk, the stage was set. I perceived in Holmes an air of quiet determination, underscored by a confidence that no threat would deter him from unveiling the truth. He cautioned Mrs. Hudson to let none pass until he gave the word, for he wished all parties to gather at once. He believed that only by confronting them in a single assembly could he elicit the revelations so long concealed. As the evening light faded, I steadied my own nerves, bracing for the collision of personalities soon to follow. Little did I realize how profoundly the events of that night would alter our collective fate, or how close we all stood to a final reckoning with a cunning adversary. If Holmes had at last solved the cipher, the truth now threatened to overtake us all in a single decisive stroke. I recall glancing at my pocket watch, each tick echoing like an ominous drumbeat against my heart. Holmes, meanwhile, stood by the mantel, silent but for his measured breathing, as though orchestrating the drama yet to unfold that lay before us. When the appointed hour arrived, Mrs. Hudson ushered our varied company into the sitting room, where Holmes had seen to every meticulous detail. Chairs were arranged in a deliberate semicircle, compelling our guests to face one another. Sir Edgar, looking drawn but resolute, took his seat near the mantel, while Lady Helena settled with regal composure opposite him. Inspector Lestrade stood by the door, arms folded, his gaze darting across the assembled figures as though he expected trouble at any moment. A gaunt man in a threadbare coat, our unnamed informant, slipped in quietly, avoiding eye contact with all but Holmes. At first, polite greetings were exchanged in halting tones, yet the tension soon mounted when Holmes stepped forward, announcing that he had prepared a demonstration of what he termed the final unravelling of our Gordian knot. He mentioned a new piece of evidence discovered earlier that day, but gave no further explanation, only a faint smile and an enigmatic glance. I, for my part, perceived an undercurrent of suspicion among our guests. Lady Helena's cool self-possession betrayed no outward alarm, but her fingers tightened around the handle of her parasol. Sir Edgar, meanwhile, cast anxious looks toward Holmes, as though waiting for some catastrophic revelation. Even Lestrade, typically forthright, appeared uneasy, shifting his stance from time to time. Unbeknownst to those present, Holmes had spent the previous hour readying certain hidden devices. a subtle arrangement of mirrors for reflection upon coded signals, a sealed side chamber prepared for a sudden confrontation, and a small recess behind the bookcase that he had insisted I help him clear. Though I did not fully grasp the purpose of these measures, I recognized that Holmes intended to spring a trap of sorts, a carefully orchestrated means of exposing the individual he suspected most. The atmosphere grew taut as Holmes began to speak, addressing his guests with measured courtesy, while withholding vital specifics about his alleged breakthrough. All eyes fixed upon him, none more intently than Lady Helena's. I could see the tension in her posture, the slight narrowing of her eyes. Every detail suggested she feared that Holmes had found a flaw in her story, a contradiction poised to upend her carefully guarded secrets. It was in this electric hush that he invited us to witness the reading of the decoded message. Holmes stood before the fireplace, a sheaf of papers in hand, declaring that the cipher had been painstakingly unravelled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "what I hold here is no mere political puzzle. Rather, it is the blueprint of a personal vendetta, carefully disguised as intelligence. Tonight, I shall unveil the truth long obscured by a cloak of deception." Silence descended upon the room. Sir Edgar, his eyes rimmed with fatigue, sat forward in his chair. Inspector Lestrade, notebook at the ready, seemed braced for some damning evidence against a well-known criminal ring. Yet Holmes's gaze drifted in Lady Helena's direction, prompting me to observe her closely. Though her composed features betrayed little, I noted the slight tremor in her gloved hand. Holmes cleared his throat and began reading, his voice calm yet resonant. He translated the arcane symbols into English, line by painstaking line. The document referenced alliances forged in secrecy, along with veiled allusions to a great betrayal that had ended in tragic repercussions. It mentioned a man once apprehended through Holmes's intervention, an international assassin of grim repute, and a covert network scattered across London's underbelly. As Holmes continued, I discerned that the text also recounted how certain interested parties had conspired to exact revenge upon the detective who had thwarted them. Indeed, the message was part history, part death warrant, ominously naming the sum for Holmes's elimination. Halfway through the reading, Lady Helena grew visibly agitated, her normally poised demeanour beginning to crack. She pressed her lips together, glancing at the clock with a muted anxiety. At last, Holmes reached the portion of the text that spoke of a hidden sponsor, identified only by an initial that might stand for multiple identities. "It is at this juncture," Holmes explained, "that the true meaning emerges. The coded references point to one figure orchestrating the entire scheme, a confidant who once promised loyalty but was instead the architect of betrayal." He paused, letting his words hang in the charged air. "I have reason to believe that person is among us tonight." A murmur of disquiet passed through our guests. Sir Edgar raised a trembling hand, as though about to protest. Lestrade, meanwhile, drew closer, his pen poised to record Holmes's every utterance. Yet my attention lingered on Lady Helena. Her rigid posture had given way to a taut readiness, as though she feared each syllable might damn her in the eyes of all present. In that trembling instant, I sensed we stood at the threshold of an unmasking. Holmes lowered the final page, stepping aside so that every gaze could converge upon the silent figure he seemed to suspect most. The tension spiked, and we braced ourselves for the moment of revelation that was sure to follow. Barely had Holmes's voice died away when Lady Helena Marchford rose from her seat with a poise at once elegant and fiercely determined. Her sharp gaze swept over the room, landing briefly upon each astonished face before her composure shattered. In a voice quavering with suppressed emotion, she declared that all their assumptions were misguided. The code, the intrigues, the cunning infiltration, each was devised to avenge a wrong Holmes had committed long ago, a transgression she now intended to lay bare. At first, none could fathom her meaning. Then Lady Helena spoke the name of a brilliant but malignant adversary from Holmes's younger years, presumed lost after a catastrophic confrontation. She revealed that this man was her husband, a fact she had concealed to secure her plan. The hush that followed was palpable, broken only by Sir Edgar's strangled exclamation. Holmes stood by the mantel, his eyes narrowed. "Then he lives?" he asked, voice taut. Lady Helena, however, insisted that her husband had perished, driven to flight and despair by Holmes's pursuit. Now she served as the final instrument of his vengeance, determined to see him undone for the heartbreak he had wrought upon them both. A collective shock rippled through the gathering. Inspector Lestrade stared, pen poised uselessly. I struggled to reconcile the cultured figure of Lady Helena with the desperate confessor standing before us. Through cunning and a profound thirst for retribution, she had orchestrated every clue and trap, patiently tightening the web until Holmes was left with no escape. "In denying him mercy, Mr. Holmes," she concluded, tears glimmering, "you sealed his fate. I have waited all this time to complete what he began." In that breathless instant, all illusions were stripped away, revealing a resolute widow determined to fulfill her husband's final vow. The clock upon the mantel ticked ominously, and for a moment, Holmes's controlled expression betrayed a flicker of regret. Had his brilliance truly condemned another soul to destruction, birthing a vendetta whose echoes spanned years? The revelations stunned us, but the moment of shock swiftly gave way to immediate peril. Lady Helena, her breath laboured by fury, locked eyes with Holmes as though confronting the architect of her husband's demise. Without warning, she slipped a hand into the folds of her gown, drawing forth a slender dagger that gleamed menacingly in the lamplight. A collective gasp arose, but it came too late to arrest her determined lunge. Holmes twisted aside with lightning reflexes, narrowly evading the blade's lethal arc. Sir Edgar staggered to his feet, and Lestrade rushed forward with a sharp command on his lips, yet Lady Helena, displaying surprising agility, spun toward Holmes again, her voice rising in a cry of long-suppressed rage. "You cost me everything I held dear," she howled. "Now I shall repay you in kind." Heart pounding, I moved to intervene, only for Holmes to signal me back, his grey eyes gleaming with a steady calculation. For an instant, the world seemed suspended around that solitary, desperate figure. Grief and vengeance burned in Lady Helena's eyes, driving her to press her attack with unrelenting ferocity. In the fray, chairs toppled and exclamations filled the cramped space. Despite Lady Helena's skilled thrusts, Holmes managed to sidestep each blow, his own strength tempered by a clear reluctance to harm her. At last he caught her wrist, forcing the dagger to clatter upon the floor. Tears streaked her cheeks as she struggled in vain, her anguished voice accusing Holmes of ripping her life apart. Lestrade closed in, stepping between the onlookers. "Release the weapon, madam," he ordered, and Lady Helena complied, her grip slackening with a sob. A weary pall fell over the room as her unspent fury fled, leaving only profound sorrow in its wake. Holmes guided her gently to a chair, his own breathing measured, yet strained. "Your pain is real," he said quietly, "but vengeance can never mend what has been broken." For a moment, none dared speak. Lady Helena's trembling form spoke of a torment far deeper than mere anger. I, too, felt the weight of Holmes's past, now laid bare in tragic form. Even as the threats subsided, we recognized that the battle between mercy and retribution had reached its most perilous stage, and that the final reckoning still lay ahead. The hush that followed Lady Helena's subdued outburst weighed heavily upon us all. She, trembling in her seat, had momentarily cast aside her fury, though her eyes burned with unspent sorrow. Meanwhile, Holmes stood in thoughtful silence, as though sifting through the final pieces of a puzzle. Then, with measured deliberation, he stepped forward, addressing the room with a quiet gravity. He declared that the matter was not yet concluded, for Lady Helena had been misled in her conviction of her husband's demise. Indeed, the true author of the cryptic message Holmes revealed was none other than the man she believed lost forever. Her husband still drew breath, his cunning undiminished. Lady Helena's face froze in raw disbelief, her anger giving way to confusion and renewed despair. "You cannot mean it," she whispered, pressing her hands together as though to steady herself. Holmes spoke with gentle precision, explaining that the bullet carved with that emblem and the cipher's distinctive phrasing strongly suggested her husband's continued existence. Moreover, the cunning trap laid at Whitehall carried the unmistakable signature of a mind intimately familiar with Holmes's methods. I, too, stood stunned by this startling turn. If Lady Helena had orchestrated part of this scheme in her late husband's name, then her husband himself had orchestrated a far greater ruse, ensuring that no one suspected he yet lived. Leaning heavily upon her chair, Lady Helena demanded proof. With unwavering calm, Holmes produced fragments of correspondences he had compiled from various underworld sources, each bearing her husband's distinctive cryptographic hallmark. "He has tested me from afar, playing upon your sorrow and my sense of guilt," said Holmes, his voice subdued yet resolute. "This entire labyrinth was designed to force our paths to converge once more, to ensure that, whether by your hand or his, I should meet my end at last." The power of those words struck me profoundly, for it exposed the labyrinthine cunning of a man who had survived defeat, only to return with a vengeance beyond imagining. Holmes then turned to the others assembled, emphasizing that while Lady Helena had played her part, the true puppeteer lurked in the shadows. "He has left a trail for me to follow, though it brims with peril at every turn," he continued. "Hence, the message you believed was a summons to avenge your husband's death, when in fact it was his cunning means of orchestrating your vengeance against me." A hushed horror settled over the gathering, for we comprehended the audacity of a foe presumed lost to memory. Lady Helena sank back, her tears revealing betrayal. In that instant, all illusions fell away, and we stood upon the brink of a darker revelation yet to come. Yet it was Holmes who appeared most deeply affected by the unmasking of this old nemesis. After ensuring Lady Helena was disarmed and momentarily calmed, he withdrew to a quieter corner, beckoning me to his side. There, in low tones, he confided truths I had seldom glimpsed in our years of companionship. His voice trembled with an uncharacteristic hint of remorse as he recalled the day he had spared Lady Helena's husband from certain capture, believing the man might reform. Instead, it seemed Holmes's mercy had seeded the hatred now returned to haunt us all. Never had I seen him display such personal anguish. His features, though composed, betrayed an undercurrent of sorrow. "Watson," he confessed, "I once admired that man's intellect, believing him a worthy rival. Yet I misjudged his nature, and my failure cost him his freedom, his dignity, and ultimately his soul. Now, after all these years, he returns not just to claim my life, but to corrupt those around him, Lady Helena most of all." Listening to Holmes speak thus, I could not help but recall the many times he extended compassion to defeated foes. Such magnanimity, once cause for my admiration, had, in this instance, yielded the direst consequences imaginable. I placed a hand upon his shoulder, offering what comfort I could. "Holmes," I said, "you cannot hold yourself accountable for the evil that festers in another's mind. Nor can you abandon the principles that guide your actions." He paused, a flicker of that old resolve rekindling in his eyes. "You are kind, Watson," he murmured. "But it is evident that my illusions regarding redemption have played a cruel role in this drama. I fear I may not easily absolve myself of the consequences." And yet, even as he spoke, I perceived the stirrings of renewed determination in his demeanour. At length, Holmes faced me, a trace of sadness haunting his features. "He was a rival of brilliance, Watson, one I dared to hope might one day direct his intellect toward noble pursuits. Instead, he has become a spectre, intent on finishing what fate once denied him." In that confession, I sensed a humanity Holmes seldom allowed himself to reveal. Though plagued by regret, he would not yield to despair. The case demanded resolution, and so, gathering his composure, he turned back to our guests, prepared at last to confront the final reckoning that loomed before us. I had seldom seen Sherlock Holmes more fatigued than he was that evening, yet there was a triumphant gleam in his eye as we settled before the glowing hearth at 221B Baker Street. Lady Helena Marchford, subdued and shaken, lingered in a corner, guarded by Inspector Lestrade. Sir Edgar Charlton, pale with relief and lingering shock, hovered by the mantel. With the immediate danger past, Holmes regarded us all in turn and announced that the time had come for the full truth to emerge. "My friends," he began softly, "you believed yourselves entangled in a conspiracy involving the highest echelons of government. Indeed, the mention of secret documents and unscrupulous foreign agents suggested a plot of national importance. Yet, I must inform you that the so-called state secret at the heart of these perplexities was never truly about affairs of state. Instead, we have faced a singularly motivated campaign of revenge, cunningly disguised as political intrigue, designed to ensure my personal destruction." He paused, his gaze travelling from Lady Helena to me. "This entire enterprise, from the burglaries and the coded messages to the deadly attempts upon my life, was orchestrated by an individual whose sole purpose was to draw me into a trap. Unbeknownst to most, I recognized certain marks and ciphers reminiscent of an old adversary, a figure I once believed lost. In truth, he survived, forging new alliances and feeding upon an all-consuming desire for retribution." Gesturing for Lady Helena to speak, Holmes explained how her involvement was spurred by the same misinformation, carefully sown by that adversary. Under the guise of revealing government secrets, she was led to believe that I had caused her husband's demise, thus stoking her resolve to avenge him. "Each outward sign pointed to political sabotage," said Holmes, "yet the underlying impetus was bitterly personal. My foe exploited Lady Helena's grief, all while weaving a narrative that would cast me as the target of a conspiracy far greater than it truly was." At this, Sir Edgar exclaimed that he too had been duped. The official channels he trusted had been manipulated by skillful forgeries, each seemingly confirming the presence of a clandestine threat to national security. "You were but pawns in a single-minded vendetta," Holmes declared, his voice tinged with regret. "He used your authority and fear to isolate me, ensuring that every loyal ally saw me as a potential menace, forcing me into a corner from which he believed I could not escape. As the fire crackled, we realized the breadth of this deception. It was no conspiracy at all, but rather a personal assault, an assassin's noose concealed behind the veil of politics. In that moment, the truth lay bare. Once the immediate shock subsided, Holmes directed our attention to the history that had paved the way for this peril. "Some years ago," he began, "I undertook a clandestine inquiry into a growing network of spies operating from the fringes of British society. Their ringleader, to my surprise, was no foreign agent, but a charismatic nobleman who concealed his treacherous dealings behind a respectable facade. That man, I soon learned, was Lady Helena's husband." A startled murmur went through the room. Though Lady Helena's hands clenched at her skirts, she seemed almost resigned to the revelation. Holmes pressed on, his tone heavy with memory. "In exposing that network, I discovered that our adversary commanded not only covert operatives, but also considerable influence among the very officials sworn to protect our nation. It was a delicate operation, requiring both stealth and swift action." According to Holmes, the decisive blow came when he gathered enough evidence to force the man to flee England rather than face trial. "My greatest mistake," Holmes admitted, "was showing mercy at the end. I believed that, deprived of his power, he would fade from public life, or perhaps reform himself. Instead, he vanished, vowing revenge for what he viewed as a personal affront. I never reported his final whereabouts, partly hoping he would see reason, and partly fearing the punishment he might otherwise incur." He glanced at Lady Helena. "I can only surmise that you were told your husband died at my hands, or at least due to my meddling. But from the moment I recognized certain cryptographic hallmarks, I suspected he might still be alive. It appears he orchestrated this entire ruse, feeding you falsehoods to weaponize your sorrow against me." Lady Helena, trembling, merely nodded. Inspector Lestrade broke the uneasy silence with a grim acknowledgement that official records had listed the man as missing, presumed dead. "Indeed," Holmes said softly, "and in that presumed death, he discovered the perfect cloak for his vengeance. He let the years pass, building fresh alliances, until this final scheme was poised to strike. By masquerading as a matter of state, he ensured that all eyes were drawn away from the private vendetta that truly motivated him." Holmes next laid out the structure of the trap that had nearly ensnared us all. "The coded message itself," he explained, "was never intended to reveal secrets of genuine political value. Rather, it was a carefully crafted death warrant for me, cleverly cloaked in the language of state intrigue. Every seemingly official symbol was chosen to mislead, each reference directing suspicion toward foreign powers or hidden conspiracies." He paused, meeting my eye. "By inviting key figures like Sir Edgar, my adversary hoped to spread alarm at the highest levels of government, thereby isolating me from potential allies. Once I was publicly suspected of complicity or treachery, I would have nowhere to turn. Meanwhile, Lady Helena's grief was to serve as the final blow. She would act on her husband's supposed behalf, completing the vengeance he had planned." Lestrade, frowning, considered the documents Holmes had handed him. Each segment bore a distinct style, reminiscent of government communiques, yet on closer inspection revealed inconsistencies. "I see it now," the inspector muttered. "It was all misdirection, and we nearly played right into it." Holmes's voice softened. "Precisely. Had I not recognized certain telltale signs from that older case, I might have accepted this material as genuine. By the time I uncovered the truth, it might have been too late. The plan hinged on my inability to distinguish a forged political puzzle from a personal vendetta. In short, the code was a means to shepherd me into a lethal corner, ensuring that any cry for help would sound like further evidence of wrongdoing." With the scheme thus revealed, I felt a chill that no hearth could dispel. Our enemy had woven a lethal web from the threads of heartbreak, guilt, and calculated deceit, an apparatus so intricate that it almost trapped the one mind capable of unraveling it. Holmes grew silent, his customary composure momentarily eclipsed by an unspoken dread. "It is not the threat of death that troubles me," he admitted at last, "but the realization that my adversary sought not just to kill me, but to dismantle my every support. By sowing lies about my complicity in a political plot, he intended to rob me of trust, leaving me as vulnerable in spirit as in body." He cast a wistful glance in Lady Helena's direction. "In twisting your grief, he exposed my greatest failing, a propensity for mercy that he counted upon to complete his design. Had I acted more decisively years ago, I might have spared you this agony." We each felt the weight of that admission. Holmes's voice, usually calm and self-assured, bore traces of remorse. The man who had seen through countless deceptions now wrestled with a betrayal fashioned from the shards of his own conscience. Shaken by the magnitude of this plot, I implored Holmes to record the affair in meticulous detail, so that future generations might learn from his triumph and his missteps alike. He, however, declined with uncharacteristic firmness. "Some truths," he said, "carry a burden too grave for casual perusal. Should I perish, you must decide when the world is ready for such revelations. Until then, my friend, let these ghosts remain in shadow." Though disheartened, I understood. Holmes had walked the edge of darkness, and he feared exposing it might tempt others to follow the same perilous road. Outside, the fog thickened, muffling the last distant sounds of London's restless streets. Holmes stood at the window, pipe in hand, and murmured softly, "Secrets are seldom destroyed, Watson. They merely bide their time, awaiting the hour when men's frailties grant them new life." And in that quiet truth, our case was done. As we settled once more by the hearth at 221B Baker Street, I observed in Holmes a curious serenity that belied the perils we had narrowly escaped. He gazed into the embers with a pensive air, then spoke in the low, measured tones I had come to associate with his most profound insights. "My dear Watson," he said, "we have witnessed how a mere thread of misplaced vengeance can be spun into a net that ensnares even the sharpest minds. In the end, it was not the grandiose ruse of political secrets, nor the whispered half-truths that proved dangerous, but rather the human flaw that gave them life. Pride, jealousy, regret. These may slumber within us for years, only to awaken at the faintest provocation." I nodded, considering how close we had come to ruin at the hands of an adversary Holmes once spared. "And yet," I ventured, "might we not have prevented such suffering had the past been put to rest more decisively?" Holmes paused, a shadow crossing his features. "It is the tragic paradox of mercy," he replied. "To temper justice with compassion carries as many risks as it does rewards. Nevertheless, I do not regret showing restraint. What I do lament is that pride and grief found a way to pervert that benevolence. Dear reader, in your estimation, what do you believe was the criminal's greatest miscalculation? Was it underestimating Holmes's resolve, or presuming that clever forgeries alone could mask a vendetta rooted in heartbreak? We invite you to share your thoughts on this question in the comments below. If you have enjoyed following our latest venture into the hidden corridors of London's underworld, please subscribe to stay abreast of future chronicles and discuss new riddles with fellow enthusiasts. Feel free also to share this account with friends and family who delight in a good mystery. After all, the more minds that ponder these enigmas, the closer we come to illuminating the darkest secrets of our time.